The neighborhood was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted peace. Streets were clean, lawns were trimmed, and most days passed without much noise. The homeowner had lived there for a few years and kept a low profile. He worked long hours, came home tired, and valued quiet evenings more than anything else. He followed the rules, paid his dues on time, and never caused trouble. To him, the house was not just a building. It was safety, routine, and comfort. Most neighbors were polite but distant. They waved, exchanged small talk, and then went back to their own lives. That was fine with him. He was not looking for attention or drama. He believed that if you respected others and minded your own business, life stayed simple. That belief started to crack on a warm afternoon when he noticed a printed notice taped to his front door. It was from the Homeowners Association. The paper claimed he had violated a community rule. No clear explanation. Just a warning and a deadline. At first he laughed it off. Mistakes happened. Maybe they mixed up addresses. He read the notice again, slower this time. It mentioned yard appearance and improper use of property. He looked around. His lawn was trimmed. Nothing was broken. No trash. Everything looked the same as it had the day before. He decided to call the number listed. The call went straight to voicemail. He left a calm message, explaining that he believed there had been an error. Days passed. No reply. Then came another notice. This one sounded more serious. The language was sharper, the tone colder. It mentioned fines and possible action if the issue was not corrected. Still, no clear description of what he had done wrong. That was when he first saw her in person. She was standing near his driveway one morning, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. Her posture said she was in charge. She did not greet him. Instead, she looked him up and down, as if judging whether he belonged there. She told him she represented the HOA. Her voice was loud, enough for nearby houses to hear. She spoke fast, listing rules and warnings, barely allowing him to respond. When he tried to explain that he had received notices but did not understand them, she cut him off. She said it was his responsibility to know the rules. She said ignorance was not an excuse. She said people like him always caused problems in communities like this. That last sentence stayed with him. He felt embarrassed, not because he had done something wrong, but because of the way she spoke to him. Neighbors walked by, pretending not to listen, but he could feel their eyes. He nodded, kept his voice steady, and asked for written details. She smirked and said he would get them soon. Then she walked away as if the conversation was over. That night, he could not relax. The house felt different. The silence felt heavier. He kept replaying the moment in his head, wondering why she had been so aggressive. He pulled out the HOA handbook and read it carefully, line by line. Nothing matched the claims in the notices. He told himself it would be sorted out. It had to be. But the next week proved him wrong. She began showing up more often. Sometimes she stood across the street, watching. Other times she walked past slowly, staring at his property as if searching for flaws. New notices appeared, each more threatening than the last. The language made him sound like a problem resident, someone who refused to cooperate. He tried emailing the HOA office. No response. He tried calling again. Still nothing. The stress started affecting his daily life. He rushed home from work, worried about what he might find taped to his door. He stopped sitting on his porch. He avoided eye contact with neighbors, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he felt exposed. One evening, a neighbor quietly approached him while he was taking out the trash. The neighbor spoke softly and said this was not the first time. Others had been treated the same way, but most stayed quiet to avoid trouble. That made him realize something important. This was not about rules. This was about control. Still, he tried to stay calm. He believed that if he remained respectful, the situation would cool down. He sent a polite letter asking for a meeting. He asked for clarification. He asked for proof. The response came quickly this time. She knocked on his door early one morning. Too early. When he opened it, she stepped closer than necessary. She told him a meeting was not needed. She said she already knew he was in violation. She said fines would start soon. He asked her to explain exactly what rule he had broken. She rolled her eyes and said she did not have time to educate him. She warned him not to argue. That was the moment he realized kindness would not protect him. After she left, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the window. He felt angry, but more than that, he felt determined. Something about her confidence did not sit right. It felt rehearsed, not factual. Like she was used to people backing down. He decided he would not be one of them. That night he organized every document he had. Purchase papers, old letters, HOA agreements. He read them slowly, highlighting anything that mattered. He took photos of his property, documenting every detail, not out of fear, but out of preparation. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful as always. Lights glowed softly in windows. Lawns rested under the quiet sky. Anyone passing through would think everything was perfect, but inside his home, something had changed. The calm life he once had was under threat, not because he broke the rules, but because someone believed she could push him without consequences. And while she thought this was just another warning, he knew it was the beginning of something much bigger. He did not know yet what the truth would reveal. He only knew one thing for sure: he was done being silent. Days turned into weeks, and the homeowner quickly realized that the harassment was only getting worse. Every morning, he walked out to check his mailbox and front door, expecting some new notice or threat. He found another letter one Tuesday morning. It was more aggressive than the previous ones. This one mentioned fines that could escalate daily legal action, and even removal of property features that allegedly violated community rules. There was still no clear explanation of what he had supposedly done wrong. The homeowner felt the walls closing in. At work, his mind drifted to the neighborhood, to the looming threat of fines and harassment. It was hard to focus. He started missing minor things at work, forgetting small tasks, and getting frustrated with himself. He felt trapped. The idea that he had followed every rule made it feel even more unfair. This wasn't about a mistake anymore. This was about someone trying to dominate him. The HOA woman's presence became more frequent. She seemed to appear at random, sometimes standing across the street watching, sometimes leaning over the fence with binoculars, taking notes. Neighbors gave her a wide berth, and some even avoided his property when she was nearby. It was as if everyone knew that confrontation was inevitable, but they were afraid to get involved. The homeowner tried to maintain a normal routine. He watered the garden, cleaned the driveway, and mowed the lawn, doing everything by the book. Still, she found something to complain about: the driveway's color, the height of the grass, the angle of the garden hose. Each time, she acted like it was a huge violation. The homeowner began documenting everything he did, taking photos of every corner of the house and yard, noting times and dates. He had never imagined that living peacefully would turn into this constant vigilance. One evening, he decided to confront her, but only in a calm, logical way. He approached her while she was taking notes on a clipboard near his front gate. She looked up at him, annoyance already written on her face. "I want to understand what I'm being accused of," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I want to fix anything if there is a real issue." She crossed her arms and leaned back. "I don't have to explain myself to you. You know the rules. You've seen the notices. You're in violation. That's enough." He felt a surge of frustration, but he stayed calm. He asked politely, "Can you tell me exactly which rule I broke? And what part of my property violates it?" She glanced around as if looking for witnesses and said, "Rules are rules. You'll be fined if you don't comply. That's all you need to know." The homeowner realized she wasn't going to answer. Her goal was to intimidate, to make him feel powerless. And for the first time, he understood that the notices, the threats, the constant watching were all part of the plan. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. Back inside, he took a deep breath. He had to stop reacting emotionally. Anger would not help. Fear would not help. He needed a strategy. He started compiling all his HOA documents, receipts, previous letters, and records. He went through each one carefully, highlighting any mention of property rules, penalties, or procedures. He made notes of inconsistencies, of vague language, missing steps that the HOA was supposed to follow. As he did this, he began noticing small patterns. She often skipped proper channels, ignored formal requests, and made threats without giving proof. She was bold because she assumed people would back down. Intimidated by her loud personality and the official-sounding letters, he realized she relied on appearances and confidence more than facts. He also spoke quietly with neighbors, but cautiously. A few admitted that they had been intimidated in the past, but no one wanted to get involved publicly. Most had chosen to pay small fines or comply with petty demands just to avoid conflict. But a couple off neighbors gave him hints about how the HOA operated, about meetings he could attend, and about previous complaints that had never been properly resolved. Armed with this knowledge, he started feeling a shift. Fear began to turn into determination. He began creating a record of everything. When she appeared, what she said, what notices were received, and what actions he had taken in response. He printed photos of his property from multiple angles. He wrote down conversations, times, and locations. Every action he took was methodical. He was building a case, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Meanwhile, the HOA woman grew bolder. She left notes on his windshield, sent emails with urgent language, and showed up more frequently. Sometimes just standing and watching, sometimes knocking without reason. Her behavior became predictable in some ways and erratic in others. She clearly expected him to break under pressure, to get angry, or to argue. He learned quickly not to give her the reaction she wanted. He stayed polite, calm, and meticulous. Inside, he felt the tension, but he also felt a growing strength. She had underestimated him. She assumed that anyone in his position would be scared, frustrated, or apologetic. Instead, he was methodically gathering the evidence he would need to prove the truth. It was not easy. The stress affected his sleep, his appetite, and even his friendships. He avoided unnecessary socializing, spending evenings documenting and organizing. At work, he had to fight off the distraction of worry. The entire experience made him question how such authority could be exercised without accountability. He began learning about legal protections, HOA procedures, and resident rights. He realized that preparation, patience, and facts were his best weapons. There were moments of doubt. He wondered if anyone would believe him, if the system was truly stacked against residents, and if he could withstand the constant pressure. But each time he felt close to giving up, he reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong. The rules he followed were clear. The property he maintained was in perfect order. His conscience was clean. With each passing day, he grew more confident in his approach. He would not let intimidation and threats dictate his life. He would meet the situation with facts, calmness, and persistence. And although the HOA woman seemed to hold all the power on the surface, he realized that power was based on perception. If he could expose inconsistencies and follow the proper procedures, the truth would eventually come out. And so he prepared for the inevitable escalation. Knowing it would test his patience, his resolve, and his ability to remain calm under pressure, little did he know that the next encounters would reveal even more about her methods and open the door to finally standing up, not just for himself, but for others who had suffered in silence. The homeowner spent hours each evening going through his documents, photographs, and past correspondence with the HOA. Every detail mattered. Each photograph of the yard, the driveway, the garden, and even the mailbox became part of a growing archive of proof that he had done nothing wrong. He labeled each photo with dates and times, knowing that clarity would be critical if this came to a formal dispute. He also collected copies of the community handbook, old meeting minutes, and any communication that showed the HOA's own rules and obligations. While he worked, he thought about the HOA woman. Her confidence came from the fact that most people were too intimidated to question her. She believed she could dictate terms without accountability, and that fear made her bold. He realized that if he could show her and the HOA board that she was acting outside her authority, he could neutralize her intimidation. The first breakthrough came when he noticed inconsistencies in her notices. One letter cited a rule that had been changed several years ago. Another threatened fines that exceeded the limit stated in the HOA documents. A third claimed damage or violation that was clearly documented in the property records as compliant. These discrepancies gave him the confidence to continue, knowing he had tangible evidence to counter her claims. He also began reaching out to neighbors more cautiously. Some had already faced similar harassment, and they shared tips, documents, and advice. A few were willing to provide written statements about their own experiences. It was small support, but it helped him see that he wasn't alone. The HOA woman's power depended on isolation. By quietly connecting with others, he was chipping away at the wall of fear she had built in his free time. He reviewed local HOA laws and regulations. He discovered that residents had the right to request written explanations for violations, appeal fines, and even demand mediation. There were timelines the HOA was supposed to follow and procedures they had to follow. Every violation of these rules strengthened his position. He also became meticulous about recording encounters. Each time the HOA woman appeared, he noted the date, time, and what was said. He even began using his phone to take discreet photos when necessary. Her behavior became increasingly aggressive, but he refused to rise to her bait. Patience and documentation became his strategy. One afternoon, he received a phone call from the HOA office. A staff member, sounding nervous, told him there had been complaints about the property. He calmly asked for details, and as he suspected, the staff could not provide any specifics. They repeated the vague claims she had made. He politely requested that any future complaints be submitted in writing with evidence. The staff member hesitated and agreed. This small victory gave him encouragement. He realized that staying calm and persistent could create cracks in her armor. He also noticed that she began avoiding direct confrontation for a few days. It was subtle, but her confidence wavered when he refused to react emotionally. The homeowner also learned the value of timing. He avoided confrontations when she tried to provoke him and instead focused on preparation. He reviewed each notice carefully, noting every inconsistency. He began writing a formal document outlining his compliance, complete with evidence. This document would serve as a reference in case the matter escalated to a formal hearing. While this was happening, life outside the HOA drama continued. He worked, paid bills, and maintained his home, but every small stressor reminded him of the conflict. His mental strength was tested daily, and he found that organizing, planning, and preparing gave him a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. During these weeks, he also reflected on the psychological tactics she used. She relied on intimidation, loud speech, and frequent unannounced visits. Her letters used aggressive language and threatened escalation. By understanding her methods, he became immune to fear. He realized that her power depended entirely on his reaction. The moment he remained calm and documented everything, her influence weakened. Neighbors started noticing the change too. A few would nod in support when they saw him outside. Some quietly complimented his diligence. He realized that by standing firm, he was not only protecting himself, but also showing others that it was possible to resist bullying tactics without confrontation. One evening, he decided it was time to review all his work systematically. He laid out every document, photograph, and note on the dining table. He compared each complaint to the evidence he had collected. Patterns became clear. Every threat or fine she had issued was either exaggerated or unjustified. He created a timeline showing the sequence of harassment, juxtaposed with his documentation of compliance. This timeline would eventually become a powerful tool in presenting the truth. The homeowner also took care to maintain his own mental health. He went for walks, read, and spoke occasionally with trusted friends outside the neighborhood. These small breaks allowed him to recharge and return to his documentation with fresh eyes. He realized that endurance, patience, and consistency were more important than quick reactions or confrontations. Despite the pressure, he began to feel empowered. He had been treated unfairly, but he now had facts, evidence, and knowledge on his side. She may have thought she was untouchable, but the more he documented and prepared, the more vulnerable she became. He also began anticipating future encounters. He knew she would not stop until she felt she had pushed him into submission. But he had learned to respond strategically. Every letter would be replied to with facts, every appearance recorded. every threat countered with calm preparation. It became clear that this was not just a fight about one property or one set of rules. It was a lesson in standing firm, using evidence instead of emotion, preparing for the moment when the truth would finally speak louder than intimidation. He knew the battle was not over, but he had laid the groundwork for turning the situation around. And deep down, he sensed that the day would come when her confidence would meet the reality of his preparation. When she expected him to break, he would not. When she assumed she had control, he would show the limits of her authority. And when the HOA board saw the truth, there would be no way to deny it. The homeowner had begun to transform fear into determination and patience into strategy. What had started as a simple life interrupted was slowly becoming a story of resilience and quiet strength. Weeks later, the homeowner received notice of an official HOA board meeting. This was the moment he had been preparing for, though he did not yet know what the outcome would be. He spent the next several days organizing every piece of evidence he had collected: photographs of his property, letters and notices from the HOA, notes of conversations, and copies of the community handbook. He created a clear, logical timeline of events, showing each instance where the HOA woman's claims were false or inconsistent. On the day of the meeting, he dressed neatly and carried all his documents in a folder. As he entered the room, he saw the HOA woman already there, her clipboard in hand, her expression confident as always. She assumed that she could intimidate him in front of the board, but he had prepared mentally for this. He felt a quiet determination as he took his seat. The meeting began, and the HOA woman immediately started presenting her complaints. Her tone was assertive and loud, aiming to dominate the room. She listed each violation, assuming the board would take her word as final. She did not expect resistance. She expected submission. The homeowner waited patiently. When it was his turn to speak, he calmly addressed the board. He presented each piece of evidence, referencing dates, photographs, and letters. He explained clearly how each claim was either inaccurate or exaggerated. He pointed out inconsistencies in her notices and showed how certain fines were not in accordance with the community rules. His voice was steady, and he maintained a respectful tone throughout. He did not let anger or fear influence his words. As he spoke, he noticed a shift in the room. Board members began looking at each other, reading the evidence he presented, and murmuring quietly. The confidence of the HOA woman began to waver. She tried to interrupt, but he remained composed, politely asking the board for the opportunity to present his full evidence. The board allowed him to continue, and he systematically worked through each issue, showing that his property was fully compliant and that the HOA woman's actions had been unjustified. He also included statements from neighbors who had witnessed her behavior and confirmed that she often acted outside her authority. He showed how she relied on intimidation and threats rather than facts. With each point he made, the tension in the room increased. The board members were now carefully reviewing the documents, making notes, and asking questions. The HOA woman, who had entered the room with confidence, began losing her composure. At one point, she attempted to argue that certain rules were subjective, trying to twist the situation to her advantage. The homeowner calmly countered by pointing to the exact language in the handbook, showing that compliance was clear and measurable. He explained how her threats and aggressive behavior had caused unnecessary stress and anxiety, and emphasized that all residents deserved fair and transparent treatment. The room was quiet for a moment. The weight of the evidence he presented was undeniable. Board members asked questions directly to him, and he answered clearly, providing additional documentation when requested. His preparation paid off. Every claim she made could be verified against the evidence, and she had no facts to support her aggressive accusations. The board discussed quietly among themselves, and it was clear that they were seeing the situation from his perspective. They asked the HOA woman for supporting evidence, and she could not provide any. Her confidence faltered further as the gap between her claims and the documented facts became obvious to everyone as the discussion progressed. It became evident that the homeowner was not only in compliance, but had also followed every procedure necessary to challenge the claims. The board members began to question why she had acted so, aggressively without proper documentation, and why she had not responded to his earlier requests for clarification. He remained calm, focused, and professional, never letting frustration show. His patience and preparation had turned the tables. The intimidation that had been a constant shadow over his life had been replaced by clarity and truth. He realized that the same patience and attention to detail that had been necessary to collect evidence were now paying off in the form of credibility and respect. Finally, the board made their decision. They acknowledged that the homeowner had acted in full compliance with community rules and that the HOA woman had overstepped her authority. They instructed her to cease all aggressive communication and to follow proper procedures in the future. Any fines or threats previously issued without merit were nullified. The homeowner felt a wave of relief and satisfaction, not only because justice had been served, but because he had handled the situation calmly and professionally. The HOA woman left the room quietly, her demeanor subdued. The homeowner knew that she had been confronted with facts she could not deny. Her usual confidence and power had been undermined by preparation and persistence. He also knew that this was a lesson in standing firm, remaining patient, and using truth as a shield against intimidation. After the meeting, some neighbors approached him privately to thank him for standing up not only for himself, but also for others who had felt powerless. They admired his calmness, thoroughness, and courage. He realized that by remaining steadfast, he had inspired respect and perhaps even hope in his community. Back at home, he reflected on the past weeks of stress and preparation. The battle had been exhausting, but it had also been a test of resilience and strategy. He had learned the importance of patience, evidence, and calmness in the face of bullying. The experience had changed him. He felt stronger, more confident, and more aware of the importance of standing up for one's rights. He also thought about the HOA woman. Her behavior had been intimidating, but it was based on perception rather than fact. When confronted with truth and preparation, the facade crumbled. He realized that intimidation only works against those who do not prepare, those who allow fear to dictate their actions. In the days that followed, the neighborhood returned to its usual calm, but the homeowner carried with him a sense of achievement. He had turned a difficult and stressful situation into a victory not through anger or confrontation, but through careful planning, evidence, and patience. He knew that the experience would serve as a guide for handling any future challenges, reminding him that preparation and perseverance can overcome even the most aggressive attempts at control. He looked around his home, the yard, the driveway, and the garden, and felt a sense of peace return. The confrontation had ended. The truth had been revealed, and the neighborhood once again felt like the quiet, safe place he had always valued. Yet he remained vigilant, knowing that authority must always be met with awareness and respect for rules and rights. He had learned that standing firm with evidence and calmness could turn the tables, and that lesson would stay with him long after the meeting. After the board meeting, the homeowner felt a mix of relief and quiet satisfaction. The confrontation had ended, but the journey had been longer and more draining than he had anticipated. For weeks he had felt under constant surveillance, each day shadowed by letters, threats, and unexpected visits. But now, truth had been acknowledged, and justice had finally been served. He understood that his calmness, careful documentation, and persistence had made all the difference. In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt different. The HOA woman, once loud and assertive, now kept her distance. Her confidence had clearly diminished after the board had confronted her with evidence she could not dispute. The homeowner noticed that neighbors who had previously avoided her now walked freely, greeting him with nods, smiles, and even casual conversation. It was a quiet victory, but meaningful. He realized that standing firm had not only protected him, but also encouraged others to resist intimidation. Life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. He spent his evenings tending to the garden and working on home projects without the underlying stress of constant harassment. Even routine activities, like taking out the trash or mowing the lawn, no longer carried the tension they had for weeks. The peace of his home had been restored, and he felt a renewed sense of control over his life. Yet, He also reflected on what had changed within him. The ordeal had been exhausting, and there were moments of doubt and fear. There were sleepless nights, and he had felt the weight of isolation. But through it all, he had learned important lessons about patience, preparation, and self-respect. He realized that fear is often what gives power to those who seek to dominate others. By refusing to react emotionally, documenting every interaction, and understanding his rights, he had turned fear into strategy and resilience. Neighbors began approaching him more often, not just to express gratitude, but to seek advice. Some had quietly faced similar situations, but had given up, assuming that challenging the HOA was impossible. Seeing the homeowner handle the situation with calm determination inspired them. He shared his experience, encouraging them to remain patient, gather evidence, and address issues formally rather than emotionally. He emphasized that preparation and clarity are more powerful than intimidation or aggression. The HOA woman's reputation in the neighborhood had also shifted. People were more cautious around her, aware that her authority was limited when confronted with facts. She could no longer rely on fear and loud assertions to control residents. The homeowner's experience had subtly changed the dynamics of the community, proving that accountability and truth could outweigh bullying as he continued to settle back into normal life. He also noticed a change in himself. He felt stronger, more confident, and more self-assured. The confrontation had been a test of character, and he had passed. He had stood his ground without resorting to anger or hostility. He had communicated clearly, respectfully, and effectively. And he had achieved a sense of justice that was both personal and communal. Reflecting on the journey, he realized that this experience would serve him in many ways in the future. It had taught him the importance of careful observation, thorough documentation, and strategic thinking. It had shown him that preparation and patience are often more effective than confrontation and reaction. And perhaps most importantly, it had reminded him that standing up for oneself is not about being loud or aggressive. It is about being informed, composed, and persistent. The neighborhood continued its quiet life, but the echoes of this confrontation lingered in small ways. Conversations at community gatherings, nods in passing, and shared stories reminded residents that courage and preparation could overcome intimidation. The homeowner had become, without intending it, a quiet example of resilience and principle in the face of pressure. The homeowner also carried a sense of closure. The HOA woman had learned the limits of her authority, and the community had seen that truth could prevail. No longer would letters and threats create unnecessary fear, and he felt a renewed appreciation for the calm life he had once taken for granted. He continued to tend his property, enjoy quiet evenings, and engage with neighbors in a more relaxed, confident manner. In the end, the story was not just about fines, letters, or a single confrontation. It was about human perseverance, the importance of standing firm in the face of intimidation, and the power of patience, preparation, and evidence. It was about maintaining dignity even when challenged by someone who seemed determined to create chaos. And it was about reclaiming one's life, home, and peace through calm determination. As he looked around his yard, noting the flowers, the neatly trimmed lawn, and the quiet street beyond, he smiled to himself. The ordeal had tested him, but it had also strengthened him. He had faced a challenge that could have been overwhelming, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. The neighborhood returned to its usual calm, but he carried within him a quiet triumph, a reminder that truth and persistence can overcome even the most determined attempts at control. After the resolution of the board, meeting, and the homeowner's victory, life in the neighborhood slowly returned to its calm rhythm. But the homeowner realized that the experience had left a lasting impact on him. Though the immediate stress of threats and intimidation was gone, he understood that standing firm in the face of bullying required continuous awareness, preparedness, and community support. The lessons he learned in patience, observation, and strategic thinking became part of his daily life, shaping how he approached interactions and decisions. In the weeks that followed, he noticed small changes in how people treated each other in the neighborhood. Where once people had kept quiet, Avoiding confrontation with the HOA woman, now there was a sense of quiet empowerment. Some neighbors began asking him for advice, curious about how he had managed to remain composed and organized under such pressure. He shared his approach carefully, emphasizing the importance of documenting everything, understanding rules, and responding calmly rather than reacting out of anger or fear. The homeowner also reflected on the psychological impact the harassment had had on him. At first, the constant letters, visits, and threats had made him anxious, distracted, and even doubtful of his own actions. But as he organized his evidence and prepared for each encounter, he discovered a new sense of control. By taking responsibility for his own response, he realized he could protect not only his property, but also his peace of mind. This sense of agency became a key part of his daily routine. One morning, while tending to his garden, he noticed the HOA woman standing across the street, observing quietly. He acknowledged her presence without confrontation, continuing his work calmly. Her behavior had changed. She was no longer aggressive or loud. Instead, she seemed hesitant, as if unsure of how to act now that her authority had been questioned. The homeowner understood that her intimidation relied on fear, and since that fear was gone, her power had diminished. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that composure and evidence could neutralize even persistent attempts at control. Neighbors began to reconnect more openly. Conversations at community gatherings became more relaxed, and there was a subtle shift in the neighborhood dynamic. People were more willing to engage with one another and discuss issues openly rather than avoiding conflict out of fear. The homeowner felt a sense of community grow around him. Small but meaningful, reinforcing the idea that courage and preparedness could inspire positive change beyond his own experience. He also dedicated time to understanding the legal and procedural aspects of HOA governance more thoroughly. While he had initially learned about his rights out of necessity, he now appreciated the knowledge as a tool to maintain fairness and prevent future conflicts. He created a personal guide outlining HOA rules, procedures for filing complaints, and steps for appealing fines or actions. This guide became a reference not just for himself, but for other residents who sought clarity in dealing with the HOA office. While the neighborhood seemed calmer, he remained vigilant. He understood that authority, when unchecked, could overstep boundaries again. His approach was not about confrontation, but about preparedness. He continued documenting minor issues, keeping track of correspondence, and observing changes in the neighborhood's administration. This vigilance allowed him to enjoy his home and community, without falling back into the anxiety that once dominated his life. He also reflected on the personal growth that came from the ordeal. The experience had taught him patience in situations where emotional reactions might have been instinctive. It had reinforced the value of preparation, research, and evidence. Most importantly, it had shown him that standing up for oneself does not require aggression. It requires clarity, consistency, and courage. These lessons extended beyond HOA disputes, shaping how he approached work, relationships, and everyday decisions. In quiet moments, he thought about how fear can affect people differently. Many neighbors had chosen to remain silent, complying with unfair demands to avoid conflict. While understandable, he recognized that silence often empowers bullies. By stepping forward with facts and composure, he had demonstrated an alternative. It was possible to defend oneself without hostility and still maintain peace. This realization became a guiding principle in his life. He also paid attention to the subtle ways community dynamics had shifted. The HOA woman, though still present, was no longer central to interactions. Her behavior had been moderated, not necessarily because she had changed internally, but because the environment no longer allowed her intimidation to thrive. People were more confident in questioning unclear directives and in seeking proper explanations. The homeowner's experience had, in effect, created a ripple of awareness and empowerment in the neighborhood, in his personal life. He continued to value the simple routines that had once defined his peace. Mornings spent in the garden, evenings reading or working on small projects, and casual walks around the neighborhood became ways to reconnect with the calm that had been disrupted. Yet, there was a sense of pride underlying these routines, a quiet acknowledgement that he had faced challenges head-on and come through stronger as weeks turned into months. He occasionally reflected on the moment when he first received the letters and warnings. The fear and stress that had seemed overwhelming now felt like a distant memory. What had mattered most was not avoiding conflict, but responding to it thoughtfully and strategically. He had learned that preparation, documentation, and composure could overcome even persistent attempts at intimidation. The homeowner also recognized the importance of balance. While vigilance was necessary, he allowed himself to enjoy life without becoming obsessed with monitoring every potential threat. He understood that confidence, knowledge, and community support could provide security without creating anxiety. This balance allowed him to live more fully, appreciating both the calm of his home and the strength he had gained. Neighbors, who had once avoided interactions, now exchanged smiles and conversations. Acknowledging the positive change that had come from his steadfastness, some even began to document their own communications with the HOA, inspired by his example. He realized that standing up for oneself could have broader effects, encouraging fairness and accountability beyond his own experience. Looking back, he saw that the ordeal had transformed not only his understanding of HOA governance, but also his personal resilience. He had learned to remain calm under pressure, to rely on evidence rather than emotion, and to approach challenges strategically. These lessons were not just applicable to neighborhood disputes, but to many aspects of life, providing a foundation of confidence and clarity in quiet moments. As he tended his garden or sipped coffee on the porch, he reflected on the journey. The letters, visits, and threats that had once caused anxiety now seemed like part of a learning process. He had faced intimidation, researched thoroughly, documented meticulously, and presented calmly. The outcome had been justice and restored peace. But the experience had also given him tools and insights that would last a lifetime.